Hi everybody. Welcome back to our second video tutorial for week 1, UL100ZB, Research Skills, Information and Technology. And in this video tutorial, we're going to be covering Chapter 2 of Scope from our textbook. And as we've mentioned before, we very much want you to read the chapters that go along with each of the modules in our textbook. So Chapter 2, Scope, please be sure that you read this along with watching the video tutorial for this session before you start doing any engagement activities or learning assessments for this week. So Scope actually deals with knowing what you don't know, identifying the types of information that will best meet the need, and then figuring out identifying different formats, and demonstrating the ability to use new tools. So flexibility is a big part of Scope. And as you notice, this is the second pillar of information literacy. We do want you in terms of Scope 2 to be able to identify what types of information best meet the type of information need that you're working with. So you might recall from our Identify video tutorial that we spent some time on Bubble Us with that mind map, thinking about the perspectives and the sources and the types of sources that I actually am going to need to identify long-term health effects of electronic cigarettes. We're going to be working with a slightly different topic in this video tutorial, but the same concept actually does apply. So Chapter 2, Scope, has a hierarchy of information formats and their characteristics. This is kind of the hierarchy that I grew up with 30-some years ago when I was in college. It was very traditional when I was in college to watch the evening news on CBS, NBC, or ABC. Those were our choices. We had CNN, but that kind of came along a little bit later on. Nothing like the internet, nothing like websites, and certainly nothing like social media 30-some years ago. So more of a traditional hierarchy of information has flowed from news to government documents to being disseminated in scholarly journals and finally compiled in books. And as you can see, as we go from news all the way to books, the information becomes increasingly in-depth. A question for you, though, particularly in this generation, is where does social media fit into this hierarchy, or does it? Has social media kind of usurped everything that we used to know about a traditional hierarchy of information? In some ways, I believe that it has. The information life cycle is also on Chapter 2, pages 17 and 18 of our textbook. And I do want you to go back and take a look at that. I've given you an excerpt here as well. Very traditionally, an information life cycle has started with somebody coming up or creating an idea, maybe something that just hasn't existed before or something that exists in a different way. The idea could be presented, maybe talked about through news media, news outlets. In terms of scholarly information, we will often present a new idea at different conferences for various disciplines. The idea then could definitely be refined by publishing an article about the idea, maybe much more in-depth in scholarly journals. You might have professors who keep saying to you, go back to scholarly journals, find articles in scholarly journals. The reason they're doing that is that they want you to find these refinements of an idea. Or there might be critical reviews of the idea in print or online, perhaps like letters to the editor in scholarly journals kind of talking about an idea back and forth. And finally, many ideas will make it to ebooks or print books that offer a deeper analysis or deeper thinking about the idea. Again, maybe think about sometimes with papers, if you might be required to find a certain number of books, journal articles, and websites. That's because your professors want you to have a very broad perspective of that information from a variety of different formats, going through that information life cycle. So I thought it might be kind of fun to look at this in another way. You might have heard of this. There have been a lot of stories out there that if I have a wart on my skin, on my hand, that duct tape can be used to remove warts. That basically you put duct tape over the wart and then somehow after a few weeks the wart will disappear and maybe it will fall off. Is that really true? Does that work? Well, we can actually use this topic and apply it to the information life cycle and have a little bit of fun with it. So let's start with the creation of an idea. Whoever thought of using duct tape for wart removal? Where in the world did that idea come from? I sometimes think that somebody just got really desperate one day and thought, maybe this will work to remove a wart, and somehow it did. Somebody had to actually create that idea. Then how was the idea presented? Well, you know, there is a tradition of folk medicine, kind of like folk arts. Perhaps it was passed on through word of mouth through decades and decades that somebody told somebody else, hey, if you really are desperate, if you need to figure out how to remove this wart, try this, try duct tape. It worked for me, or it worked for my friend's friend, something like that. So that's how the idea could have gotten presented. The refinement of the idea. Somewhere down the line, and we're going to see this in just a second, somebody did some experiments. Perhaps they did some experiments with human subjects. Somehow this was scientifically tried and tested. And then scholarly journal articles have been actually published on the idea of duct tape and wart removal. And they are indeed out there. They're in medical journals, perhaps in sociological journals, and so forth. And finally, with the information life cycle, we get into the deeper thinking about the idea. We might be able to find books that have been written by doctors or nurses, medical authorities, overall about how warts can be treated. But there also might be a lot of books that are out there that deal with the histories of folk medicine. And I'm willing to bet you that if the books are out there about folk medicine, that probably you could find some chapters in the book that might talk about different folk ways, folk remedies of removing warts, including the tried method of using duct tape. So back to the topic. What sources could I use to find information about whether or not duct tape is useful for wart removal? Again, now we're focusing upon the scope. What's the scope of my information need? I'm sure that many of you have used a type of library catalog, and we do have that through our library as well. So Chapter 2 defines a library catalog as a database that contains all of the items located in the library, as well as all the items to which the library has access. So we use a library catalog to find books that the library has. You may also, depending upon the scope of your library, be able to find electronic books, e-books, streaming video files, DVDs, different formats. A discovery search is something that our library catalog actually does feature. And a discovery search is something a little bit different. It's kind of a layer over a library catalog. So in the case of William Allen White's library, our discovery search will let you put in a topic, and it's going to bring in books, articles, and other references. So it's going to bring in a lot more than just books. It's a way of actually discovering what is out there. And many libraries are actually employing discovery searches more and more. Now, there can be advantages and disadvantages to a discovery search. It's going to show you a lot of information. However, a lot of those items, depending upon the enormity of your topic, may or may not be immediately accessible as books or as articles. And so you may have to resort to other means to find those books or those articles. But again, we're focusing upon the scope. So I mentioned that there are other information resources. We mentioned the discovery search. Many of you may be familiar with library databases. We're going to be learning about these as a part of our course, general or subject specific. Google and Google Scholar are certainly other information resources. Social media platforms, I could certainly resort to Instagram or Facebook. I mean, I could put something out on social media saying, hey, has anybody ever tried duct tape for wart removal? Well, I might get some results. Those would be kind of interesting, but I would get some results nevertheless. And finally, personal communications. You can always look for experts in a field for your topic and see if you can find ways of identifying who those people are and how you could get in touch with them, perhaps online, through email. Don't ever rule out other people, though, as experts in the field as another information resource. So Chapter 2, Scope, also talks about going back to a topic and identifying something called key words. Now, key words can be nouns, but they can also be verbs that can be converted into nouns. So if we look at Someone told me that duct tape can be used to remove warts from one's hands. Is that true? Does that work? You might remember the research question from Identify. This is my research question, by the way. So duct tape certainly is a key word, obviously. Warts, yeah, obviously another key word. Wart removal, hand, skin, truth, perhaps effectiveness. You notice that I'm taking some of these verbs here and I'm turning them into nouns. And Chapter 2 scope also talks about something that you may have used, but you may not have ever known what it was called. The words and or not are probably the most powerful words that we can tell you about when you are setting up something called a search statement, and that's what we're leading up to. Something and something else will narrow your search. So if I want information about cats and dogs, the shaded area where I have the arrow pointing to and represents the number of results that I would get. So I would be only getting results in a database or in a catalog or on Google that talk about cats and dogs in that same search for information. Or broadens your search. Or is good if you're using synonyms or words that carry the same meaning, hand or skin, cats or dogs. Then I'm getting everything that talked about cats, everything that talked about dogs, as well as that overlap that talked about both cats and dogs. Not is one that I don't actually use that often because not is a powerful word that will eliminate results from your search. Now, in this instance, I might be focused on only information that talks about cats. I don't want any information, I don't want any search results, any articles that talk about dogs or that overlap of cats and dogs. So if I did cats, not dogs, that's all I'm going to get, information about cats. The thing about not is that if you use it, you may wind up eliminating potentially valuable search results. So use that with caution only if you are absolutely sure that there's a search term that you don't want to have appearing in a search for information in a database or in Google or in a similar interface. So the other area that we're focusing on that Scope talks about as well, Chapter 2, is the idea of a creation of a search statement. We're going to be asking you to do this in some assignments coming up. So a search statement is basically something and something else. Everything that I have on this slide are sample search statements. So you see that I generated a lot of my keywords. So I might want to go into a medical database, and I might want to search for duct tape and wart removal. Duct tape and, notice these parentheses here, warts or wart removal or wart treatment. Those parentheses around the word or are very, very important. You might remember something from algebra in which you might solve whatever mathematical formula is in the parentheses first. And then that result is combined with whatever is outside the parentheses. This is the very same concept happening here with the Boolean operators of and, or, not. So in our second point, warts or wart removal or wart treatment will be searched first for information in a database or in another resource. And then once that finishes, all those results will be combined with duct tape. Or I could do duct tape and wart removal and medical. Remember, and narrows your search. So the more words that I put in with the word and, the more narrow my search for information is going to get. We'll be seeing some examples later on when we start getting into actual demonstrations of databases and the way these work. Thank you. And now that you've finished both the Identify and the Scope tutorials, you're ready to move on to the tutorial for Week 1, Engagement Activities and Learning Assessment. Please be sure and watch this next video tutorial before you attempt any of the activities and learning assessment. All the information that you need will be in that tutorial.